Hello, and welcome to the last podcast, the last essay. This was one of those essays that I absolutely loved writing. And I, I find it really interesting. Essays that have fewer footnotes and references tend to be the ones that I enjoy more because they are more from my own brain as opposed to referencing and relying upon other people's brains. And I think they probably end up flowing a little bit better as well. There's lots of really good, well, I think really good references and metaphors in here. And I think it's all grounded on relatively solid foundations. And it leads on from a lot of the other things that we've been speaking about in the past few weeks. But it's not overly burdened by lots of links to 19th, 18th, 17th century philosophers and all of that kind of stuff. So I really hope you enjoy it. It's long. These essays need to be long. And in fact, each of these essays could probably be a book. I'm learning this as I go through and as I have to cut things out and frustrate myself by not being able to maybe write as much as I want. But hey, we have made it through to Christmas. I think this is my 15th essay. I think it's about 40,000 words so far. And as I mentioned right at the top, if you go back to the first episode, the first essay, the purpose of putting this stuff out there is to hold myself accountable. I've got the structure for a book here, and I really want to get to the end. Next year is going to be a challenge, lots of things going on. I really hope that I'll be able to keep up the cadence, maybe making it every other week instead of every week, because these essays are long and hard. But I really want to get to a stage that I think, hey, look, I've got a hopefully quite convincing, compelling, well put together argument. If you mash all of these essays together, put a put a few linking sentences in there, I think you've got something that could be really interesting. And I think we all need to think really, really long and hard about how humans, how we as individuals flourish in 2026 in the context of some really, really hard macroeconomic circumstances, technological advancements, and all of that kind of stuff. So I hope you enjoy the essay. Wishing you a very Merry Christmas and a wonderful New Year. Principle 4, don't juice your fruits. In the 2013 movie Her, the solitary protagonist Theodore, played by Joaquin Phoenix, meets friends Amy and Paul in the lobby of his work. As they ride the elevator together, Paul notices Theodore's smoothie, pairing the know-it-all to comments. Don't you know what people say? You've got to eat your fruit and juice your vegetables. You see, continues Paul, as the long suffering Amy rolls her eyes, by juicing the fruit, you lose all the fibers. And that, concludes Paul, is what your body wants. That's the important part. Otherwise, it's just sugar. Taken out of context, it is a rather strange scene, capsuled by the claustrophobic elevator without consequence for the rest of the film. However, Her presents a near future dystopia where humans like Theodore become first reliant upon and then fall madly in love with their artificial intelligence companion, Samantha, voiced by Scarlett Johansson, the oral fantasy for so many aspiring tech CEOs. It is a tale of the allure of convenience, one where reliance leads ultimately to obsession. Towards the end of the film, Samantha is offline for a few hours, which prompts a manic Theodore to race across town, dropping everything to try to get her working again. As when we juice our fruits, director Spike Jonze seems to be compelling us not to sacrifice nutrition for convenience. By letting the friendly Samantha into his life, Theodore realized that he didn't really need the friction and difficulty of his past life, and instead chooses to spend every waking hour with his artificial intelligence companion. As Paul argues, our bodies need the nutrition and not the sugar, which is addictive and results in chronic illness. Written a decade before the release of ChatGPT, Her presents a remarkably prescient view of a world in which we can forego a nutritionally complete life in favor of outsourcing more and more of the things that make us human. This essay argues that to flourish in a world of artificial intelligence, we must put in the work and eat the fibre. Only then will we gain the nutrition we need to build a life worth living. We flourish when we accept friction, difficulty, and a little struggle instead of always opting for and relying on the easy solution. When we embrace the friction of a life lived out there in the world, interacting with other people, we start to slow down, acknowledging and even embracing the time that things take, luxuriating in the juicy explosion of a grape or even the crunch of a shiny red apple. The allure of fast food. We all know that too much fast food isn't good for us. However, when we've just driven for 4 hours and the children are screaming bloody murder, it takes superhuman self-control to ignore those welcoming golden arches, a modern day church spire, or that backlit southern gent twirling slowly around, a lighthouse in a dark, hungry land, promising chicken so tasty that you will want to lick your fingers afterwards. These companies are expert at placing their fast food joints in places where our desire for convenience overshadows our resolution to lose a few pounds. The fast food industry is emblematic of a shift from consumer to convenience capitalism. No longer is it good enough for us to drive 5 minutes to the nearest drive-through. We now demand that these greasy brown bags be delivered to our doorstep. Every subscription service, the business model of technology, promises convenience in return for dependence. Too busy to walk your dog? Download an app and someone will walk that pesky hound for you. Too busy to put up some already extraordinarily convenient flat pack furniture? Get someone to come round and build it for you. Believe in God but don't really feel like speaking to normal people from your community? Download a Christian AI chatbot and get conversing with the divine. Want to pretend you've read a book but don't really have the inclination to read the whole thing? Just read an AI summary. Don't fancy cooking, but can't be bothered to go out? Get an overpriced ready meal and pretend to yourself that it's better than a takeaway. It is all so alluring. As author Nassim Nicholas Taleb laments, now I am punished by privilege and comfort, and I can't resist comfort. A modern capitalist society pushes convenience and comfort in every part of our lives, from friendship and entertainment to raising families and building careers. Artificial intelligence represents the technological equivalent of abundant fast food. Always available, always ready to give us the easy option, to help us speed up a process, providing us with a superficial understanding which we hope will be good enough. In the business models of technology, it becomes natural to equate good with easy. If a technology reduces friction, be it a call center, the drafting of a complex legal document, or a trip to the supermarket, it is deemed to have fulfilled its function and is therefore good. This is a remarkably narrow definition, which, as economists will state, does not take into account the external consequences of these time-saving technologies. Amazon Prime is good in the sense that it is quicker and easier to get almost anything we want delivered to our door. But is Amazon Prime actually good for us as consumers who could probably benefit from the small friction of having to walk into town to purchase a book or some tennis balls or a spatula? And what about all the waste, all the profligacy? Amazon Prime is the fast food of our households. And what about Google Translate? It is good in the sense that we can now navigate foreign countries without the flapping of arms and the hope that our over-enunciating might induce comprehension. But is it good if we want to really understand a culture and feel confident that we have a grasp of a foreign language? Google Translate is the fast food of communication. Artificial intelligence chatbots, therefore, are really only good to the extent that they reduce the friction and increase the speed of acquiring knowledge and completing work. Artificial intelligence is the fast food of our minds. The machine stops. First published in 1909, E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops was the author's only attempt at science fiction and served as a direct rebuttal to H.G. Wells' Modern Utopia, which presented a postmodern society emancipated from scarcity by liberating omnipotent technology. The Machine Stops introduces the reader to the protagonist Vashti, a middle-aged lecturer living on her own deep down beneath the earth. Her only means of communication are through video conferences administered by the machine. Like the rest of humanity, Vashti has grown weak, softened by a dependence on the machine for her daily bread, confined to a life of sterility and boredom. For Vashti and her fellow humans, it all started so benignly. The machine promised convenience, safety, even abundance. The machine's mastery was incremental, silently inserting itself into every area of life, promising comfort and convenience in exchange for agency. As Forster writes, but humanity, in its desire for comfort, has overreached itself. It has exploited the riches of nature too far. Quietly and complacently, it was sinking into decadence, and progress has come to mean the progress of the machine. It was only when Vashti reconnects with her son Kuno where the extent of her dependence becomes clear. Through his risky explorations above ground, Kuno has been made aware of the machine's conceit. He compels Vashti to travel, to visit him, to get out of her cell. Cannot you see, he pleads, that it is we that are dying and that down here the only thing that really lives is the machine? Kuno sees the problem, clear as day. We created the machine to do our will, but we cannot make it do our will now. It has, Kuno argues, robbed us of the sense of space and the sense of touch, blurring human relations and narrowing love down to a carnal act. At the end of the short novel, we witness the machine breaking down, collapsing in on itself, leaving a stricken humanity bereft of agency and denuded of survival skills, made soft by its reliance upon the machine. Forster's machine presents a species that has sacrificed its agency and autonomy for convenience and comfort. When we forgo our unique human capabilities of survival and quest for flourishing, we become extremely fragile, dependent on the benevolence of a system or a technology whose only good is speed and efficiency. How then can we flourish in a world where comfort and convenience is always just a click away? Do the work. We flourish when we put in the work, choosing the harder, more rewarding path. To be human is to assert agency on the world, and to have agency, we require conviction. By putting in the work, we build the necessary foundations to enable a strength of character and a clarity of perspective from which we can forge conviction. Consider newlyweds heading out on a European city break, a mini-moon after a slightly overwhelming wedding. Ever the planner, the bride has spent hours researching everything about their weekend adventure, right down to memorizing street names and the path best taken from the gelateria to the Museum of Modern Art. The groom, on the other hand, hasn't lifted a finger. He's happy to go with the flow. So much so that, if pressed, he would struggle to locate their destination on a map of Europe. So when they find themselves lost in one of those delightful squares, with a fountain in the middle and orange trees providing a canopy for alfresco dining, and the bride is convinced that they turn right, with the groom arguing that they should probably go left, which one is likely to win the argument? In this example, the bride can successfully assert her agency because she has put in the work to gain the strong foundations necessary for conviction. There is, of course, risk associated with her conviction. It might turn out that turning right is the wrong direction. However, the bride can accept this level of risk. The groom, on the other hand, will not convincingly argue his case because he hasn't done the work to gain the conviction necessary to justify the risk associated with going in the wrong direction. This relationship between work and agency follows across all walks of life. How is an aspiring founder ever going to start his business without putting in the work and gaining conviction? Or a portfolio manager making a contrarian investment decision? Or a government minister setting out a vision for her department? Or a demotivated office worker setting out on a new career path? The danger with the allure of instant information and lightning fast feedback loops is that we begin to hold our opinions too lightly. We agree fleetingly to one perspective only to be convinced otherwise by another opinion just a few days later. By taking shortcuts, we build foundations out of sand, brittle in the presence of new information and strongly held opinions. A startup founder who hasn't done the work to reach a level of conviction would likely pivot as soon as the going inevitably gets tough. Investors who take a punt based on superficial research would likely not hold their nerve through a dip in the market. A government minister who governs without conviction will pay more attention to opinion polls and less to the hard work that is before her. The demotivated office worker would likely stay just that, paralyzed by the overwhelming number of potential career options that are available. It's all about the journey. Most of the time, it's the journey that counts. For most of our endeavors, nourishment is not found by arriving at the destination, be it a fantastic investment, a successful startup exit, or a re-election, but within the process itself. The journey is where we learn patience and resilience. It's where we learn to take joy in small wins and the importance of placing one foot in front of the other, even when it feels like we're wading through mud. It's where we learn not to get distracted by false signals whilst remaining open to new paths. It's where we walk alongside other people, reaching our shared destination by working as a team. The journey is where we lay down our foundations and reinforce them through openness to new information and the opportunity to learn from mistakes. Like all machine technologies, artificial intelligence exists as a series of simple input-output processes. Because it doesn't experience time, it cannot understand the rewarding nature of the journey. It is singularly focused on the destination. By skipping the journey, we remove all nourishment from life. By landing at the destination, we lose our appreciation of space and of time. Like falling asleep at the beginning of a long-haul flight, only to wake up disoriented on landing. We acknowledge that we have traveled across the world, but we have not experienced the journey. Not all journeys, however, are worth taking. If, for example, we need to attend a family wedding in Australia, it likely makes sense to fly instead of walk. If we need to carry out some qualitative market research, it might be best to appoint an agency who will do it better and faster. If we need to put food on our table, it might make sense to pop to the supermarket instead of toiling in the midday sun to grow our own food. After all, there are only so many hours in the day. Therefore, we need to identify those activities and endeavors that benefit from us putting in the work and those that might make sense to arrive at the destination a little sooner. There are some people, mainly located in tech circles, often taking self-appointed positions as philosopher kings of technology and, by extension, society, that believe the destination is the only thing that really matters. They argue with the conviction that comes from not getting out into the real world that the only point of creativity is in the output, and that the only point of playing games is to be the best. There are so many average artists, writers, and musicians, they might opine, that are far inferior to an artificial intelligence which can create better images, poetry, and music. What, therefore, is the point of putting in all that work to create something that can be manifested with a single prompt? However, just because AlphaZero is the best Go player doesn't mean that everyone has stopped playing Go. Millions of people around the world still play chess, with the full knowledge that they will never be as good as a machine. Just because artificial intelligence can create novel images doesn't mean that we down tools and give up on creating for the journey's sake. This worldview takes the perspective of the machine, viewing life in terms of inputs and outputs, of efficiency and optimization, instead of through the enriching nature of the journey. Impose stresses. Nassim Nicholas Taleb forcefully argues in his 2013 book Anti-Fragile that it is in the removal of variance and the reduction of stresses that we lose our ability to flourish in an uncertain world. Taleb's primary concern is that by removing variance in the world, we become fatally exposed to external shocks. According to Taleb, so much of modern life, from our jobs and our education to systems of power and finance, is inherently fragile, subject to break and snap in the face of stresses, defined simply as unexpected stimuli which are likely to have an effect on an object. Stresses come in all different shapes and sizes depending on the subject. For our bodies, stresses can include bacteria and viruses. For trees, stresses might include wind and rain. In our careers, a round of layoffs or a company reorganization are stressors. At a societal level, pandemics, terrorism, bank closures, regime collapse, floods, and droughts are all stressors which can result in the collapse of fragile systems and societies. Taleb convincingly argues that we become fragile when we are not exposed to the right level of stressors. If our lives are hermetically sealed, our first exposure to winter flu might be catastrophic. Saplings which are not exposed to wind and rain fail to develop the root bed to survive violent storms in future years. If we obsessively dedicate our career to a very narrow field of, say, computer science, a breakthrough technology might leave us without a job and with very few options. Taleb sees fragility all around him. From the education systems that churn out identikit pupils equipped only to triumph in examinations, which have little bearing on an unpredictable future, to pilots who have been de-skilled and enfeebled by their almost automatic autopilot. An over-reliance on artificial intelligence will result in fragility. If we become reliant upon technologies which might, on occasion, experience hallucinations, or for one reason or another temporarily stop working, we become extremely fragile. By relying on these technologies, we are also placing ourselves at the mercy of corporations which might, as is their prerogative, suddenly decide to start charging us a hefty subscription for the privilege of conversing with a chatbot. If we require our smartphone map to navigate a city and maybe even translate for us when we get lost in a foreign city, what happens when our phone's battery runs out? Taleb warns against becoming reliant upon things that sit outside of our control and whose owners' incentives are not aligned with our own. He also encourages us to become the opposite of fragile. Taleb argues that the opposite of fragility is not robustness or strength, things to which stressors have no detrimental effect, but rather anti-fragility, that which benefits from appropriate stressors. Saplings get stronger from the stressor of moderate wind, but die from an inopportune hurricane. Our muscles develop when exposed to the stresses of lifting uncomfortably heavy weights, but don't try bench pressing twice your body weight. The effects might be fatal. Our bodies develop immunity from the right level of exposure to bacteria and viruses. A timely reminder to take your winter flu vaccine. We grow when we receive challenging but ultimately constructive feedback. We feel a sense of achievement when we are placed in challenging but achievable roles. We flourish when we build a life which adapts to changing circumstances and thrives off uncertainty. As Rousseau observed when writing about Machiavelli, a little bit of agitation gives resource to souls. Don't settle for good enough. By blending lots of different types of fruit together, we end up with something that tastes unspectacularly like fruit. Add a few more succulent strawberries, and it still tastes like fruit. Remove a slice or two of mango, and you still just get fruit. By blending our fruit, we eliminate the downside risk of biting into an unripe pear, teeth bouncing off hard skin, but we also eliminate the possibility of fruity transcendence. A perfectly ripe pineapple on a hot summer's day, a juicy strawberry which reminds you of being a child, plump grapes, removed indelicately from their stalks, thrown with flair into an open mouth. Human creations that have endured serve as representations of their creator's stubborn unwillingness to settle for good enough. Consider Cologne Cathedral. The foundation stone of the vast Gothic cathedral was laid in 1248 and was laboured on for over 2 centuries before work ceased in 1473. Such was the scale and the intricacy of the project that it nearly bankrupted the entire city. In fact, the scale of ambition was so large that it wasn't until the 19th century that the second Gothic tower was finally complete. Completion of the cathedral was celebrated in 1880, 632 years after construction had begun. The cathedral is now Germany's most visited landmark, serving as an imposing physical representation of generations of believers and visionaries who were not willing to settle for good enough. By settling for good enough, we relinquish the ability to build great things, achieving a sense of pride and transcendence during the process. The nature of large language models is to create good enough images, business plans, explanations, reports, and literature. Because these models are trained on the full spectrum of human creativity, their output tends to be a murky, uninspiring blend of creative outliers. Much of this work is passable, deemed good enough for use in low-stakes endeavors. However, it is not in the nature of these models to go the extra mile, to put in the work to achieve something enduring or unique. The danger here is that our tastes tend to adapt to those things that we see most frequently. The mere exposure effect describes how people tend to develop a liking or disliking for things because they are familiar with them. Simply encountering something multiple times makes us like it more. The mere exposure effect can be amplified by what psychologists call perceptual narrowing. This phenomenon, well documented in infants, shows that the brain's perception of things that infants experience more, familiar faces, improves, whilst at the same time worsening the perception of things that the infant is not exposed to. Unfamiliar faces, different races. Neural pathways that are used more often are strengthened, with those used less becoming inefficient. In a world where algorithms and models adapt to and influence our preferences, there is a danger that we end up accepting and even liking good enough outputs, whilst also starting to fear things that challenge us or lie outside our increasingly narrow perceptual frequency. Conclusion. This essay is not arguing for a kind of extreme asceticism, devoid of comfort or convenience. It is not realistic or beneficial to aspire to a world of grudging labor, rejecting all the benefits of convenience and specialization in pursuit of some representation of authenticity. We don't flourish when we choose to turn our backs on the wonderful conveniences and nourishing comforts that have improved both the quantity and quality of our lives. We should acknowledge too that as David squares up to Goliath, our self-control is little match for the overwhelming weight of convenience capitalism. By contemporary design, our lives are filled to the point of overflowing. The odd shortcut or lapse in self-control are entirely justifiable responses to a life where so much is demanded from us. However, despite the myriad methods that modern society has conceived to compel, encourage, and entice us into taking the easy option, we still have it within our control to choose otherwise. We can flourish by exercising and sharpening our ability to judge when we can afford to take a shortcut, blending our fruit for a quick win, and when we need to sit down and put in the work. Self-control will be required, but not beyond the realms of what is possible. So too will a healthy understanding of what good is, devoid from mechanistic speed or cost. Unlike machines, humans are bound by time, and it is in our agency to decide how best to use it. Ultimately, perhaps we need to think about creating a cordon sanitaire for our minds and our humanity, protecting those experiences and endeavors that take time, savoring the nourishment that comes from things which enrich us.